What's up, everybody? It's Rocco Lupo, and this is the first ever interview in RocStudios. I'm here with one of the super geniuses in the world, Dave Malekpour. He designs studios, and I can tell you from experience now, he is the best. So to start it off, I just want to say, how do you get these speakers to sound so good, and what's your process?
Well, Rocco, thanks for having me out, and also for putting in our really our largest system, the Quattro 415s with the sub 218s, which you see behind us. Part of the magic of the speaker is based around the horn and what it can do. A lot of other speakers use tweeters for their high frequency. Augspurger uses a horn that uses a compression driver with beryllium. So we have a 4-inch beryllium diaphragm behind that wood horn there. I think also the fact that it's a wooden horn gives it a musicality. You know, the same wood that is in a Stradivarius or a guitar. Rock maple is something that has a musical resonance to it. And so when sound, and particularly high and mid frequencies, are coming from it, there's a warmth to it and a naturalness to it. The other part of it is the engine behind the speaker itself, the amplifier. In my process over many years, I started making these speakers about 28 years ago in the late 90s. In tuning them, we have a DSP engine that's now inside the amplifier. When I first started, we had to use rack mount amplifiers and rack mount crossovers and EQs, and that morphed into a DSP driven amplifier. And so one of the things I realized along the way is that by being able to line up the sound to an accurate standard, you know, when you're working in the studio, you can trust what you're hearing. And I think part of the process for artists, producers, engineers is to forget about having to interpret what the speaker's doing and just listen to it and essentially let that disappear in the process so that you're just focused on the music. I think another big piece is the way that they create low and mid range. So you have this beautiful open top end that I can adjust exactly to the room, and the same with the overall frequency. But the way the bass hits is really particularly, I think, in line with today's music and digital technology that can record everything. You know, in the old days we had a tape machine and a console. These things rolled off low end. Here we've got digital technology that can go down to 20 hertz. So we need a system that can uncover that, but we don't want it to be fake. And so, you know, one of the things that you saw yesterday was the tuning process, right? Where we, and we can get a little more into that. But
Yeah, I could tell you guys, though, from experience, when you're listening to artists, especially on ballads and stuff like that, it sounds like they're singing live to you, and it's an incredible thing to hear. And these are your biggest horns, right?
yeah, so we make 3 different size horns. That's the original Augspurger horn. Since then, we've created 2 other horns. We have a mid-size horn and a small horn. And they're based on the same concepts and geometry of the horn opening, which is 110-degree width and a 70-degree vertical dispersion. And that aids us in part of what we're able to do with the speaker, which is to aim it where we want it and also keep it off of the reflections that we don't want. So the big horn, you need to be about our distance here, at least 6-7 feet apart and roughly from the speaker. The mid-size horn allows you to get closer, and the near field horn is meant to sit like literally right in front of you. And so each of these give a different ability to put them in different size rooms, different applications. Obviously these are big speakers here, but this is 4 15-inch woofers, 2 18s, and 9,000 watts. You know, it's meant to be able to have extreme dynamic range. It's not necessarily just for the power and the volume, but more for the expression that affords.
And do you remember, like, doing your first studio with Augspurgers, like the ones that you first made?
Yeah, actually, you know, I previously was distributing Dyno Audio Acoustics. I brought them to the US in 1993, and it was an amazing speaker, a great brand. And it's really where I learned about how to tune speakers as they had morphed into using DSP in the later part of the, you know, around 97, 98, we were tuning speakers using DSP. And a client of mine asked me to make him some Augspurger monitors that he had heard in LA. And the interesting thing about Augspurgers, they were designed by George Augspurger in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were something that wasn't really a company, but it was you'd buy a design, then have somebody make it for you. And so they were always different. Somebody would have a different amplifier or different EQs or different drivers. And when I heard them originally, I thought, okay, these are cool, but I couldn't get a sense of what they were. And my client, Bobby Nathan from Unique Recording in New York, which was sort of a hotbed of, there was the early MIDI, hip hop, and a lot of people came through that studio, including people like Chris and Tom Lord-Alge mixing records there. And so he wanted to have Augspurger monitors, and he convinced me to go and make them. And in fact, he actually said, hey, this will be a good business for you. And I was like, oh, whatever. I didn't see what was coming at that time. I had been making some subwoofers that were going with the Dynaudios, and people liked the way I tuned speakers. So it was kind of part of why he convinced me. He's like, Dave, I think in your hands they would be really good. Once we started making them and I heard them for the first time, with my tuning, with my equipment, with my subwoofers, it was like, oh, actually this is a pretty cool speaker. And not only did I think that, but a lot of people who came through the studio thought that, and we started getting some calls. In fact, one of their competitors next door ordered a pair for Right Track at the time. And then I had built a studio a little before that, I think around 97, for Jay-Z called Baseline, which is, turned out to be the place where he made a lot of his greatest hits in the early stage of his career. And they were the third pair I ever made, which once they were in there, so many producers came through that room. So many artists were from there, Kanye, Memphis Bleak. And at that time, some of those guys were like living there practically. So artists would come through, and then within about 3 years from that time, we had over 35 pairs in New York City at the top studios or artist facilities. That was sort of the trajectory that got me realizing that it wasn't just a little side project to make a speaker, but something that could become a focus, and that also propelled the music at that time in an interesting way.
That's cool. Yeah, we actually met Dave through one of my favorite producers personally, Teddy Riley. And he set it up. If you guys don't know, I have a song with Teddy Riley called Leaving With Me, and he made it in our house. So we met Dave through him setting up Teddy Riley's. Me and my dad were blown away by how clear, we've never heard music like that in our lives. And I just want you to say some of the names that you've worked with, because I'm very impressed with how many people he's worked with.
Just to tap on the Teddy part, because I've known Teddy almost 30 years or something, 28 years, long time. And Teddy's had several different Augspurger systems over the years. And when he came out here to work with you, he was like, Dave, I need a system for this home studio to work with Rocco. And so we brought out a pair of Duo 8s with sub 212s, and I came out here to tune them. And I met, yourself and your dad, and I was blown away by this incredible environment, but also your music and your voice. And I felt like it was interesting that you were with Teddy, because clearly you're moved by music of that era as well as today's music. For a young man, you really could express yourself musically, and I thought that was really impressive. I remember saying to your dad, hey, whenever you're ready to take this up a notch for yourselves, just give me a call and I'm happy to come back out. And Dad called me a few months back and said, hey, we want to get our own system. And, we worked out a deal. And he first ordered a smaller system than what you have here. And then he called back and he goes, no, I just, this is a really big room. I really want Rocco to have something, big for the room. And so we put together this Quattro. And we were looking at pictures of different systems, and he saw the Ferrari red. He's like, we got to have that. And he knows that red's, your favorite color, as we could see in your chair and your garb. Yeah. I can just say that some of our clients, obviously Jay-Z has been almost as long as my career, in parallel with his career going, he's prolific, and guys like Young Guru, who we work closely with. In fact, we're still working with Rock Nation today, designing studios. We built their Long Island University program, the Rock Nation School, just last year, with a big Atmos system and all Augspurger products. We've done Snoop Studio. We've worked with artists like Alicia Keys, Dr. Dre, Wu-Tang, Wycliffe, Jerry Wonder, Platinum Studios, Quad Studios in New York, kind of the hotbed of hip-hop music in New York. Just last weekend, before I came out here, I was with Ty Dolla $ign, which was an amazing experience, and watching how their process was, because I kind of got to fly on the wall with that. And I've had that experience with a lot of our artist clients. I don't know, The Weeknd, Travis Scott. It almost seems like almost every big hip hop artist. And also we have guys like Carter Bruford from Dave Matthews Band has our system, Coldplay. And part of it is that I think that artists want to feel the music as well as hear the music, but that ultimate clarity and not having distortion, not having anything change as you're monitoring. And we have a lot of mix engineers. You know, Jason Joshua, one of the most prolific mix engineers, and Josh Goodwin. You know, these guys are mixing some of the biggest records. Rich Keller, who came up with DMX, and all of these guys are using our system and on the same mix curve that you have here. And I think that's something that when I started making these Augspurger speakers, what I realized was that we could establish a curve and a mixing and production curve where wherever you were, if you were at Snoop Studio or Carter Bruford's, you were going to get the same experience. And it didn't really matter what genre of music. It's really about having that ability to trust what you heard. And so a lot of our clients go between different studios. In fact, people call me and say, Dave, I got to go to this place. Where should I go? What's the latest room you tuned? Because I really want it to be as good as it can be. And we also have customers like Wisin, Yandel, Mike Towers, Bad Bunny, Zuna. Like, in fact, I think we have 22 systems in the small island of Puerto Rico, and that just tells you how passionate that connection between the artist and our product is. And we're really blessed to have that experience. And a small company competing with giants. There's no hedge fund behind me. I started this as a small guy with an idea to make something really high quality. And I think that's the other part of it too. Like, a lot of manufacturing today is based on cheaper, faster, smaller, broad market. And I never really looked at it that way. I looked at, how can I make something that's the best in its class? What's it going to take to make something that has no compromise? Our components are the best that we could find. Our manufacturing process has a lot of hand work in it. The finishes that you see, like, why does the Ferrari red finish look like a Ferrari? Well, it's finished like one. And it's, in your system, there's 12 layers of paint and hand sanding, and it takes time. And the paint has to cure before you touch it again. In some cases, you also have to lay another coat on in a certain time window. And so you have to plan out what colors we're painting. And we've had 2 spray booths. We just got another booth for prep and for being able to prime, and that way we can have more colors going at the same time. But it's kind of a labor of love, and everybody in the company that cares so much about it. And I think that care goes all the way to the studio. That if you put that effort into the product at the manufacturing process, it's appreciated at the level that the artists and the clients that we work with. We focused on big speakers that really move a room, but now we have speakers all the way down to a small near field, and that allows us to do a lot of different things with Dolby Atmos, with smaller rooms, production rooms. We just put a system in for a prolific producer, Drummer Boy, and he got the small MX65s with sub 12s in his room, and that's where he just cooks up at his house. But it's a pro studio, but he didn't want something monstrous. He's got a baby, but he wanted to get the feeling of Augspurger. He wanted to get that unlimited bottom end and sort of that connection with the music that he's grown up with. And he's using our product in all the big studios, so he wanted to have something that was appropriate for the size of his room. And I think when I look at this room, you got about 1,000 square foot space in here with high ceilings. Like, when we first put up the Duo 8s in here, I was like, these sound incredible in here, but man, we could definitely use some 18s, and we could use a bigger system. And so when I was talking to your dad about what would be appropriate here, I first offered, hey, why don't we get the same thing what Teddy had here? He's like, no, let's what would you do if you had this space? And so we were talking about classics with double 18s, and that morphed into these Quattros. One of the things that struck me too about you and your music is that you're so passionate about what you do. That parallels me. I'm passionate about what I do. And when you combine passion, talent, hard work, drive, creative process, That's how you get somewhere. I really believe in where you're going. And actually, we had a moment last night after everything was all tuned in. We started putting some music up and, laid down a little bass line for something you'd put together, and then picked up a guitar. And while I'm doing stuff, you wrote out some killer lyrics and a great little moment that I'm excited to hear what you do with it, if anything.
You guys might have to stay tuned for that, because we might have a song coming out saying Rocco Lupo featuring Dave Malekpour. I mean,
hey, you never know, man. And I think my journey is not, I started playing music when I was 5, and I started guitar when I was 11, and recording myself in my early teens, like yourself. My mom was a doc. She was in school for filmmaking, and she had a little open reel tape recorder that when I started playing guitar and writing songs, she's like, "Oh, I found this," and so I started recording in mono with just a 1-track recorder that actually had sound on sound, which allowed you to remove the erase head from the tape path, so you could layer over some sounds. Of course, it got a lot of noise at the same time. But at that moment that I got the feeling of like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to record. I'm meant to be an engineer or something in this creative path. It's really driven my life. Even when I was young, things would either bother me or I'd love them. And, people would say, hey, can you help me get that guitar sound that you have? Or in high school, they would call me down to the auditorium to fix the PA system because I had done that one time there, and everyone's like, oh, it sounds good now, finally. A great prolific mix engineer, Dave Malekpour, who I've worked closely with, he said, Dave, whatever sounds good in your ears makes me mix better. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I think in some ways that's part of my purpose, is to help engineers, producers, artists hear things in a way that helps them do their job better. And I think this system's going to inspire you to take your game up a lot of notches.
So Dave, I know what Augspurgers means to me, and I've experienced legends using it, but I think people want to know, what does it mean to you? Because you are the originator of the brand, the creator of the brand.
Well, I guess, the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is the unlimited power of the system, that there's no real limit. I think the human is the limit, not the system. And, a lot of speakers have little red lights that pop on when the bass hits too hard and suddenly everything changes. And with our system, that can happen, but it's at such an extreme level that most people don't approach that part. I think clarity, being able to hear crystal clear at all levels what's happening, and that the whether you're at a small whisper level volume, that you still feel a little bit of the feeling of your pants moving with the air of the bass, and that there's an emotional connection. I always think that the biggest thing about Augspurger is that it creates an emotional connection with your music. And as a producer,
that's definitely for sure. You can definitely feel the music.
Yeah, feeling the music. It was one of our slogans for a while, feel the music, because when you have that feeling, that gets captured into the recording. And you can write a good song at the kitchen table with earbuds in, but you can't feel it at that moment, right? And that changes how you might express your vocal, or how you might express a bass line, or how you might swing the drums or something like that. When you start feeling it, and it makes you want to dance, or it makes you want to move, well, then you got something that's moving you. And I think that's the benefit of a big speaker in general, but it's also, when it's tuned accurately, I think that combination of an emotional connection, clarity, powerful, yet can sound as incredible at a low volume. In fact, a lot of our clients who are mixing or producing often work at low levels for some part of their time. And what they love about it is that at a low level, you still have a full spectrum. And some speakers, you have to really crank them up to get the bottom end. In our system, at whether it's 65 dB or 125 dB, it's the same. And I think that's one of the things that Augspurger means to the artists and the producers, engineers that use them. And I could see it yesterday when you were getting down with your own new track, and feeling the bass line, and feeling even just how the pad that you put down, the string pad, like it creates an emotional feeling at that moment, and you captured it. And I think that's what Augspurgers are for. It's for feeling the music and putting that in your recording, and then also knowing that what you're hearing, because it's tuned to a standard that mix engineers can work at. When you send your tracks out to somebody, they're going to hear them the way you heard them. I think that's super powerful. I have to say here at the Lupo house, the service is excellent. The king of the castle, John Lupo, is an amazing man who has facilitated this young man's career and also just makes everyone feel, invited and warm and special. And I think, whether you're a legend like Teddy or just walk in, to feel like you're welcome is really a great experience. I felt it the first time I was here, and I felt it from the moment I came to see you guys, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate that. I just gotta say, like, I've been to studios in LA, I've been to New York, and for some reason, when there's not Augspurgers in there, you just never feel the same. And I just gotta say, it's an honor working with these, for real. And once you go to Augspurgers, you never want to use anything else. So that the only downfall is that you turn it so loud, you might hurt your ear.
Well, you got to be careful.
You got to be careful.
Yeah, the system is, like I said,
very powerful.
The human is the limit, not the system. But you tapped into something that it just made me think of something. So once you've heard the system, it's hard to unhear it. And once you see what it does to your musical process, I think that's why they became popular at the top of the market. Not because of marketing, not because of something I said to somebody, but because of the experience that our clients and artists have had. If they go to a studio and they have that first time experience, they're like, oh, I have to have that. A lot of capable artists and producers, they went to a studio and someone calls and says, hey, I was just at this place and I want to get that same system. That the product sells itself. It's not a sales pitch. It's not an advertisement. And, we do very little advertising. We do marketing, but we like it when our clients play the product for another client or another friend, and then they give us a call. And so we have this idea of the Augspurger family, and, welcome to the family, brother.
Thank you.
And that, what I call it a family is that if people know you have that system and you call them and say, hey, I'm going to be in New York, and Dave, connect me. It's like, oh, it's like a brotherhood, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that if you have that, you've got a certain level of quality that you're bringing to the party. And that's, I think, a little different than a lot of other brands out there. And the camaraderie between our clients, we're often putting our clients together. Artists that need a room, they call and say, hey, where can I go? Producers. And I think that family connection is important and strong. And I encourage you to use it. Hey, I'm going to be here, or I want to find someone to work with that knows what I'm doing. And just like Teddy introduced you to what this is all about, and how it affected your own music with the production you were doing with Teddy, and since then now with your own system, I want to see what happens in the next year with your music. Now that you're going to hear it a little differently, but do mind your ears. You're a young guy. You need those for the rest of your life. And I didn't make the system to hurt people's ears. I made it to make it that they don't hurt your ears. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about them is that, because they're so clear and so clean, when you listen at a higher volume, you don't get any ear fatigue until, unless you go like really crazy. But if you're listening at a good volume and it's not hurting, and it's, you can hear every detail, again, I think it brings a level of inspiration.
Yeah, that's something I noticed like right away too, is that at high levels, you can still like, it's not like you have to like close your ears or anything. It's like, it's manageable and it sounds perfect at high levels, low levels, and even in the mid-range too. It's amazing how clear it is, and I think that's partially because of the horns.
So Rocco, I guess, I'd ask, what's your vision of Augspurger? What does it mean to you? And what do you think you're going to do with it?
Well, something that's really important to me is really having great music out there for people to listen to. And I think with Augspurgers, I'm going to be able to take that to another level where I wasn't at. And I think that my music is going to elevate and just keep getting better because of how these sound. And I'm able to hear so many different things. And I think it will really have a great impact on people with my music because of your system. And
one of the things I noticed when we were playing back some of your tracks was the things you said to me. It's like, oh, I would have changed this thing, or I would have changed that thing. And, and I was impressed because like your song Merry Go Round already has 1 million views on YouTube, and was charting and in the UK charts. And that was without the speakers. But when we heard them on the Augspurgers, it was like, okay, this is really good. And you already were telling me things you would like to have changed or do a little differently. And I thought, again, I think that's going to be impressive as you go forward. But I appreciate also being part of your process. And, you know, music's always part of my process, so I want to be tracking what you do. And the next time you have a mix that you said I did on the Augspurgers, I want you to send it to me, because I'll add it to my playlist and I'll start understanding what your music sounds like on other systems, and just to see what's happening with your development. You know, you had a unique experience with me, because when I got out here, we had, you know, 2 big gigantic crates and boxes, and we literally had to take your entire previous setup apart, put it to the side, and put it back together. And you know, not everybody gets Dave Malekpour to put their studio together, from all the way to the rack screws and the cables being pulled, and we got it together in a nice way and had a really fun afternoon putting it together, and then it was time to tune. And
yeah, everything in a studio, when Dave does it, it's like you walk in here, you're like, all right, we got bigger speakers now, but why is there so much more room? That's exactly what we said, and he makes everything like perfect. I've never seen a studio more perfect in my life, especially not in my room. But yeah, you definitely set everything up where you're getting your money's worth with everything. And I think it's very impressive how you do everything with your speakers, to even just the little details. And like, I remember we were talking about it when he first came in, and he knows everything about these speakers, to where the woofers came from Italy. And then he was talking about stuff that's in the woofers that came from Spain. I'm like, wow, there's so much more than just a woofer, and there's so much more than just the box, or it's just everything is like, it's just incredible how you do this. And
well, there's a lot of, I think making something great is a culmination of a lot of small little details that come together to make a huge difference. And that's the same thing with a musical career. Like, you know, you hone a song, and one little one little line added to a song can be the whole difference of a hook or not having a hook. It could be a great song, but it's missing something, and then suddenly you put that one little line down, and everybody's like relates to that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the speaker development is a lot like that. You know, one little here, one little tweak there, and I'm a detail person. I want it to be that when you have that experience, whether you walk in here and don't see cables, or when you come in and everything is exactly where you need it to be. And my other company, Pro Audio Design, which Augspurger blossomed out of, you know, we focus on whole studio designs and projects and installation and equipment. And I've been selling equipment for 35 years, so I know every piece of equipment, and that allows me to walk into an environment and see it as a whole thing, not just as a pair of speakers, or not just as a room, or not just as a microphone, but it's an ecosystem. It's an entire system. So even though when I came out here to put the speakers in, we also looked at how does this layout work, and where do we want to be, and how do I want my ergonomics to be, and what do I want at hand, and you know, just making everything super comfortable for you as a artist and producer, because you produce a lot of your own products. You don't necessarily bring in other producers all the time. You know, you have your mic over here, you got your keyboard there, we got the guitars, everything is in hand's reach for you. So that in your process, and that's what I saw when I came in, is like, how do we make it so that you can do your job the best, and not be hamstrung by the layout or by the equipment, and make it part of your process, not just something that's there. And I feel like that's what we got done in the last 38 hours or whatever. We didn't get a lot of sleep, I'm not going to lie, but that's like the music business, right? Who has time to sleep?
yeah, for sure. And one last thing though too with the speakers is you could tell that they're not manufactured by a robot. You could tell that they're made with love, and you can definitely see just every little detail, and that's really it for me. I think
it's a big shout out to the crew at the manufacturing side, our paint team, our wood team, our electronics, and my chief engineer, Sam Martin, our head of wood, Steve Sherman. Like, every little thing is cared about, and I appreciate hearing that from you, because those guys don't always know how people appreciate it. And you know, when you look at something, you don't think of like all the different steps that went into it. You just think of like, I have this thing, or this is what it's doing for me. But behind that, there's so many layers that have gone into it, and it's awesome when someone feels that and can put that in their music too. So That's what I'm expecting from you, man.
Well, it's amazing. It was nice talking to you, David, and I'm sure we're going to be a family of Augsburgers for the rest of my career. So this is the first thing from RocStudios. There's many more. We're going to be interviewing more legends and more super geniuses like Dave. So stay tuned for more, and that's it.
Hey, man, thanks for having me out.
Nice having you here.
By the way, if you want to find us on the web, you can go to Augspurger.com and check us out, or proaudiodesign.com. Thank you.